Welcome to Entangled Health, where we explore the intersections of quantum science, AI, biotechnology, and human well-being. So, Paul, again, a warm welcome. It's been a while since we've seen each other. I'm so happy that you're here with me. It's really a pleasure, and I think, as I just mentioned in the beginning, we can dive deep. We could talk for years, I guess. But before we start, and I think I just like to mention the idea of the podcast, just for the listeners and you, is to bring people together who should know of each other. So we recently had Dean Radin, for example, who you know quite well, I think. And also other people from young people who have done just their master theses, but who are super upcoming talents, and just from diving from quantum to AI to biotech. I will have in future, we will have some psychotherapists, etc. And I think before we start getting to know, or before we start diving into the journey, who made us, who made us, my opener question is always, when I reached out and asked you for Entangled Health, if you have a definition or an interpretation or a first reaction that you'd like to share.
About Entangled Health?
Yes.
First, I owe you a caveat.
Okay.
As I listened to your introduction, you have asked me to be honest and open in a way that very few people ever tolerate.
That's why we're here.
The fact is, the issues you're talking about are super connected. And I have spent my whole life learning about these connections. And I've been learning how to be quiet because people are not willing to put up with some of these connections.
Okay. Let's change that.
No, absolutely. Forgive me if I even tell a story. When I was working at the National Science Foundation, I was once part of a team that created a special funding initiative, Interagency Education Research Initiative. What can we do for education if we bring together information from all of the disciplines? And I remember when the head of the NSF was presenting this to the press, and they asked him, what is it like being head of the National Science Foundation? He says, oh my God, it's like pulling teeth. They're all in these narrow disciplines. I have read Thomas Kuhn's Scientific Revolution. It's a great guide to what we really should be doing. And to get people to do it, it's like pulling teeth because they're all in some narrow discipline. But he was standing next to me, and he turned and he said to the press, except for this guy, he doesn't even know where the boundaries are.
Yes.
And that's a good summary of what my role was at NSF, connecting all of the disciplines. So health is certainly one of them. The older I get, the more I think about the health implications of areas I've worked on. And it's important to connect everything from the hardcore mathematics, which is my PhD, applied mathematics, in the spirit of von Neumann, to connect hardcore mathematical thinking with very practical, personal, everyday life. And I have learned more about the science of everyday health than just about anybody else I know. So you want to talk about entangled health? It's very entangled.
Yes, very good.
When you talk about what are quantum physics effects on health, one of the main things I think of is what the Chinese call qi. And I have discovered more and more, not only in theory and in practice, to understand and properly connect to what the Chinese call qi is absolutely essential to my personal survival.
Okay.
And there's also a good method to connect. And I'm glad I can connect these things. And I'm glad that I'm still alive this week.
Okay.
I was supposed to have an MRI today, but somehow the insurance company didn't think it was justified well enough, so they'll postpone it for a few weeks. But
so it can't be life critical if they postpone it for weeks. That's good.
There are a lot of things like that. There is a treatment for cancer. which I am very excited by. It's called allogeneic CAR T CRISPR technology.
Yes.
And they did lots and lots of clinical trials, which really show it's safe and a broad spectrum value. And so they don't allow it in the US.
Okay.
They say you have to be close enough to death. And Paul, you're not close enough to death. You're not eligible.
Congratulations.
By the way, if anybody in Germany allows it, they don't allow it here, but who knows? I sometimes hope some other country will let people live longer.
Later we put it out, so then if people listening in and have an idea, just reach out to Paul. So, and I think you mentioned, I just have to look it up how you called it. Is it Gen G integrity that you were talking about back then?
Yes. Yeah. Integrity, right. So my biggest citation index is for what I have learned about how brains and minds work. I even wrote a paper for Frontiers in Neuroscience describing the mathematical data we have on the best database in existence on mammal brains in real time. And basically, they provided proof of a theory of how intelligence works in mammal brains. And
you want to elaborate on that a bit for the listeners?
Okay.
I mean, we have time.
Okay, sure. Yeah. In fact, what the hell? If you've spoken to Dean Radin, I can tell you a human part of the story. I suspect your audience is more human than some of the scientists I deal with. When I was young, I really fiercely believed that the concept of the human soul was total nonsense. And psychic phenomena was even more total nonsense.
This was before your awakening, or what?
Yeah. I can remember in 1964, between high school and college, working in a hospital, actually. One summer, they wanted me to use computer skills to help out guys doing cardiovascular research. And it was a wonderful doctor who was my boss. He showed me a book by Donald Hebb called The Organization of Behavior. And it turns out that Hebb's book and von Neumann's work are the real two foundations which created all of our modern deep learning and neural networks. Okay, so the basic ideas of neural networks and deep learning they were already out there in the 1960s. And I loved Hebb's book, The Organization of Behavior. I studied it very closely, and right in the beginning, Hebb said, as an experimental psychologist who really knows the literature, I have looked at this literature on parapsychology, and I have to say that the significance tests they have passed are much more stringent than the significance tests for almost everything else people write papers on. However, he said, if we want to understand reasoning and learning, we need to understand Bayes' law, that the probability of a theory is the product of the conditional probability, how well it fits the data, and the prior probability. And the prior probability of psychic phenomena, he said, is so incredibly low, I really don't believe it, because everything we know from physics says this is not really very likely. And I believed that fiercely. And I knew a lot of physics at that time, fiercely, until, yes, as you say, there was a special experience. I had a very thick skull. I was totally resistant to this stuff. I knew all of the arguments why we shouldn't believe this psychic stuff. I knew all the reasons why we could do without it. And then in 1967, I had an experience which opened my mind. It didn't change my mind, except to open it. And after this experience in 1967, I said, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. There's a theory that I've gone totally crazy, but that doesn't work very well as a guide.
You mean once you're out, you can't go back? Yeah.
Yeah, so what I said was, no, I just don't know. And the whole point is, if I think I know about brains, and I did in 1967, I thought I knew a lot about brains and neural networks.
Mm-hmm.
And if I think I know about this stuff, I shouldn't have an opinion. I should find out. And so from 1967 to 1972, I explored many, many theories, approaches. But finally, in 1972, I had an experience which told me, hey, I know this is real. I don't know how it works for sure yet. I had an idea by 1972. I took courses, graduate courses in quantum physics at Harvard, which certainly affected my notion of what is possible. In fact, now that I think of it, one of my teachers in the Harvard Graduate School was a person named Julian Schwinger.
Okay.
And if we're talking about quantum mechanics, we really should know the name of Julian Schwinger. If I hear someone say they know about quantum mechanics and they'll tell me all about it, if they don't know the name of Julian Schwinger, I think, oh God, one more bullshitter out there.
Okay, tell me.
Okay. Feynman, Schwinger, and Tominaga shared the Nobel Prize long ago for the discovery of the first quantum field theory that actually worked, that actually
QFT,
predicted something experimental that required this kind of complexity. And Schwinger, Feynman, more or less should get equal credit for the invention of quantum electrodynamics, the canonical quantum electrodynamics, which actually worked and actually predicted things that nobody could predict before. Tominaga, I don't know much about. My guess is they were being politically correct, but I don't really know. I haven't read anything by Tominaga, whereas I got to meet Schwinger and Feynman and got to hear their point of view. And Schwinger was much quieter than Feynman. Feynman was really good at getting into newspapers.
Yeah, and he has his book, and it sounds like he's more an entertainer on top of. Okay. Oh, just go.
Yeah. I mean, obviously he was an intelligent guy. I mean, it'd be stupid not
definitely.
to do that. But there are people who say, didn't Feynman invent quantum computing? And basically, what I tell my friends, if you think Feynman invented quantum computing, the reason is he was in a bar with a beautiful woman next to him, and he said, "There's a lot of room at the bottom."
Yes.
But and that's pretty much as far as it went. And if people knew science today the way they knew engineering in the 19th century, everybody would know that the real inventor of what they call quantum computing now was a Professor David Deutsch.
David Deutsch, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And so, which brings us maybe to the multiverse, but we talk about this maybe later.
well, the thing is that they're connected. Most people don't realize that they're connected. So earlier, Deutsch put forward this theory that we live in a multiverse. And the mathematics for that theory are pretty straightforward at this point. And then based on that theory, he said, according to the multiverse theory, what we think of as the universe, what we see is just one slice in that universe. And it's possible to have parallel slices. So if you believe in parallel computing, if you think you can get a lot more computing power by putting 1 million processors in a box, I can split the universe in that box. So you have 1 million processors in that box. You have parallel processing in one box. And that was the idea that led him to his concept of the quantum Turing machine. And he didn't just have a philosophy. He translated the concept of quantum Turing machine into universal theorems. Feynman never had anything even close to that. In a way, you really have to say Deutsch invented the quantum Turing machine because he gave a full specification of what it should be like and proved theorems about how it had universal computing capabilities analogous to the normal Turing machine, which is universal in a way, but much more powerful, much more universal.
And Paul, help me, because I'm quantum is, I mean, I have my opinions about the practical, the philosophical interpretations of quantum of the multiverse. So definitely for quantum computing, it makes kind of sense. Maybe the only place where it makes sense. But now, I think just for those not so deep in the quantum physics foundations who might listen to this podcast, I just want to test an idea with you on. I think you also mentioned something about temporal wellness, so being whole in the past, also to be really, really health means really curing our past, our future, or whatever. And in quantum in itself is a bit of a timeless situation. Do you think that if we say we have this quantum electrodynamics, is there a time component, or is it time reversal, or bringing us eventually also to discuss the retrocausations? Or because Dean, we have had this discussion back when I was visiting him and Julia Mosbridge at Petaluma. We were thinking about temporaceuticals, for example. He always comes with this idea to say, if we would be able to influence the probabilities by focused intention, what have you, so collapsing the probability, Bayesian probability, by let's say tweaking the probability distribution for a healthy outcome in the past, we would not have cancer because it didn't happen. So this nano on very nano things in the 4-dimensional time space projection collapse of the multiverse in this one slice where we have subjective experience. Do you think this makes sense? Or how could we make a machine out of it? Or how could we individually?
It absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
My big problem is my wife said not to use her name in vain. It's hard not to.
No, okay, just tell. Sure.
When I was an undergraduate, there was a time when I actually considered, should I major in philosophy, because that's what I'm really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw what philosophers are doing in the modern world. I said, no, that isn't exactly what I want to do. That isn't what I think of as philosophy. But there are a lot of philosophers who talk about retrocausality in time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think the biggest thing they get wrong is they have too much trust in the English language.
Okay.
Now, it would be better for your listeners if I were better at the English language.
Yeah, we are all not native, so I'm not native. But tell me, what's the better idea?
So I translate my thoughts into English, but my thoughts are not in English.
Yes. Okay.
I think in mathematics and in images. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the debates about time are actually meaningless because they're depending on English words to capture too much of what's really going on. Mm-hmm. So, in a sense, if I pretend I'm really speaking English, I would say, of course, I agree with concepts of retrocausality. In fact, Richard Feynman published a lot of his articles creating his quantum field theory in a journal called IJTP, International Journal of Theoretical Physics. And one of the papers I'm most proud of, I believe it came out like in 2009, but it's easy to find in Google Scholar. I published a paper on Bell's theorem, not a matter of interpretation. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In that paper, I sort of described how a proper mathematical approach to time, proper mathematical thinking applied to the issue of time can immediately resolve the paradoxes that people were initially worried about with quantum mechanics. Initially, people were worried about things like the double slit experiment. If we live in a universe which is 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, if that's what the real universe is, just like what Einstein thought, it seemed as if that could not be reconciled with certain experiments. I am fortunate that one of my classmates at Harvard did the very first experiment of that kind. I know how those experiments work. I know what they published. I know what they found. The situation is very different in experiment than what most people think it is. But at the end of the day, yes, the experiments disagreed with common sense ideas of time. But if you replace these ideas of time with time symmetric models of the macroscopic objects you use in the experiment, the paradox will disappear.
Can you explain it in kind of lay terms a bit, or is it just? I mean, we can touch this difficulty in English language, and I want to talk about Bohm, maybe implicate order with you but just go eventually so that we don't lose. Everybody has their own ideas on what on what time.
They certainly do, and I'm very grateful to you for putting up this level of detail. Because people tend to freak out when you get to a certain level of quantum mechanics.
No, good. we need to have this.
Actually, speaking of normal life and normal people, just an old man's story. I know the brains of old men are designed to tell stories. That's part of the hardware of old man brains.
Which is good.
Really true. I remember once I had a conversation with a person named Carl Pribram. And anyone who really wants to understand what does science know about how brains work, Carl Pribram is one of the names I would recommend most highly. On my webpage, I even have a link to a video talk I gave a few years ago, just local.
Okay. So we'll definitely point. So if once this is published, I will we'll put the link to your page anyhow. So it's a fantastic resource to get lost.
My website is Werbos.com, which is pretty easy. And at Werbos.com, there's a link on brains, souls, the new unification.
Everything. And 3 photon experiments.
Well, actually,
go.
It's a big webpage. But this particular webpage is talking about brains and minds and souls.
Yeah.
And one of the talks, I actually show the faces of Carl Pribram, Walter Freeman, and their teacher Lashley. Those 3 people were the founders of what I call systems neuroscience. The real full mathematical, analytical study of the highest levels of general intelligence in the human brain. Although systems neuroscience also works on mice, not just humans, but this is where we put it all together. There are a lot of neuroscientists who will study this little part of the brain or that little part of the brain, but for the whole system, how does it generate intelligence? That field of study is called systems neuroscience. And the leaders of that field when I was at NSF were Carl Pribram and Walter Freeman. And one day I was in Carl Pribram's living room talking to him. We became friends after a few years. And he said, "Paul, I'm having real troubles with you. I have great stories for everybody crazier than me to the left. And I have great stories for these ultra-materialists to the right of me. But you are to the left of me and the right of me, both at the same time. And I'm not sure, how do I integrate that?"
Yes, in superposition with yourself. That's good.
And the thing is, if you get me at the right time of day, I really do believe in hardcore Einstein realism. I may be the last person on earth who really believes in reality the way Einstein did, with knowledge of what the quantum physics is that makes it seem impossible. I've worked out the mathematics to show it's not impossible. You can be a hardcore realist and still believe in psychic phenomena, which is the other side of life. Because after 1967, I explored, and I think there's no doubt that the psychic phenomena are very real, that we do have what we call souls, that there is a kind of spiritual connection between us, and it is consistent with mathematical science.
Mm-hmm.
But it took me a lifetime to figure out how to reconcile the different pieces and fit them together.
Is it part of the system that it's difficult, or is it in itself mysterious enough that you just can't grab it, or how does it work?
So in the end, it's really limitations of the human brain. In the end, the connections are mathematical, and you have to understand mathematics.
So in principle, it's just like this imagination that you are an ant living in 2D, and you just can't imagine what 3D is unless somebody picks you up and puts you somewhere in flat land or all these things, just to the next level, and 4D, 5D, whatever.
Yeah, that's basically what it's about.
Yeah.
So yeah, I spent most of my life trying to figure out how that mathematics fits. And now there's a greater challenge of how do I explain it to people? And then some people wonder, why do they have to know? And there are a lot of reasons why it would help humanity if we knew. Because we are going through incredible changes in our society. When one of the fields I have always studied was population dynamics, ecology, genetics, all that kind of evolution, that kind of stuff. And one of the books that really impressed me when I was an undergraduate is a book which is very famous in some quarters. But, there are a lot of things which are very famous for 100 people and unknown to others. Yes. And there's a very famous, important, fundamental book on the nature of life called Stability and Complexity in Model Ecosystems by R. May, A-Y. And he went through mathematical models of evolution. Are we evolving? Well, maybe we are. Maybe evolution is still happening on the planet Earth. Okay, if evolution is happening on the planet Earth, his book talked about mathematical models of how evolution works. And one of the scary things, in most of Earth's history, there's been a top dog species that thought it ruled the world. Now humans think they do. Dinosaurs thought they did. It's been, there's another book by George Gaylord Simpson that talks a lot about the history of life on Earth. And the funny thing is, whenever the food chain changes, the modes of production, the inputs and output go through big radical changes, the top dog species often simply goes extinct. Because if the changes depend, if the survival of that top dog depends on an ecological network, if the network changes too much, the top dog dies. Right now, the network that humans are experiencing is changing that much. In the last century, there was a Cold War. Humans came close to going extinct in the Cold War. Why did humans not go extinct? I tend to give credit to the mathematician, John von Neumann. Okay, I'm a follower of John von Neumann. I love his way of thinking, and I have built on it to extend it further. And all of our modern deep learning and all this stuff that's changing the world is all based on an edifice built on von Neumann's foundation, not Hebb, von Neumann. Turns out Hebb didn't know the mathematics well enough. Von Neumann did. We are building on von Neumann's foundation. But the problem is, von Neumann was critical in saving us from extinction in the previous Cold War. But now we are entering a new Cold War. There are people I know who believe that within the next 5 years, there will be a massive war between the crazy policemen, military officials of US, China, and Russia, all of whom are under very limited control. They are not under full civilian control for many reasons, and many people predict that this lack of control will cause a global war using technologies which I have seen. Most people don't believe this artificial general intelligence could become real in this century. It's real now. I've seen all three countries, US and Russia and China. Except some of the people who know these technologies get a little nervous if you talk about what you've seen. I've seen things in all three countries that people would kill me for talking about too much, but they are there. I've
So
seen
we let you live, so don't share if you don't want.
whatever. It's kind of it's a question of judgment what to say. The older I get, the more I know, hey, I'm going to die anyway. What the hell?
What the heck? Just go.
Yeah, but the bottom line is we live in a scary time, and our understanding of systems to manage intelligently has reached a point when we have to build a new approach or we will not survive. The challenges we face now are much more difficult than they were at the time of the old Cold War. There are many more players who could kill off the world, and there are technologies which are much more capable of killing all humans. And so the bottom line is, if we don't develop fundamentally new platforms to integrate all these different AI things in a more rational way, well, some species make it in this universe and some don't.
And I think with this, let's jump maybe just to this big picture challenge and maybe ethical framework, because I'm normally paid for AI governance, which is maybe a European problem. I don't know, but
that's what I'm just talking about.
No,
AI
I think
all of these drone fleets. This week, I've been telling many people, look at Zelensky's speech before the United Nations last week in their big session on AI. And Zelensky described what it's like to actually live in a real world with drone fleets attacking each other overhead, governed by autonomous intelligent systems. That's the most immediate source of a war getting out of control.
And just tell me to come to this, because I'm personally a bit split myself on this idea eventually. So we could go quickly pseudo esoteric, but in principle to say the human body is, let's say, divine. What makes us human is our heart and our connectedness and our ability to speak and resonate. So in principle, it's more, the next paradigm shift would be a global resonance. And because everybody's building their own...
Yeah, I sort of agree, yeah.
And in principle, also back to resonance with nature, because people are spending more on scrolling their Zohar streams than being out there in nature, living with daylight and animals and healthy food and whatever. So brings us maybe to the Noosphere or whatever, how we call it. But is there eventually an escalation of the, whatever we might call it, the AI-ish self-autonomous Geist, who's using material stuff to destroy itself, and while we as living systems might want to just not go back and only meditate, but just take a bit of a step back instead of accelerating and just go a bit more and bring ourselves also in health, meaning resonance, which each other, like dancing, singing, eating, touching, instead of just going more and more virtual. I'm just asking. So what's your take on that?
Well, like I said with Carl, like what Carl said, sometimes I'm to the left of him and to the right of him both.
Okay, good. Start with whatever's fine.
My first impulse when you talk about the Noosphere, turn the laptop around. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. But what the hell?
Your garden, yes.
More than the garden. If you could see through there, you would see what I used to think of as the 100-acre forest. And there is so much there, I shouldn't spend the hours required to say just what is there visible from that back window.
Yeah.
But there's a whole lot visible there.
Just for your, I just see your roof, no longer yourself. So your laptop is just pointing to the ceiling.
Now I'm inside. So
no, I know, but just close it maybe a little bit so I see you better.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, now better. Oh, now I see you back. Otherwise, I would just see your lamp. Sorry, Paul.
But yeah, no, it's a vast forest, and I certainly do my best to connect with it. My feeling is if we really build the right kind of integrative internet platform, first of all, it will embody a high level of intelligence. There are levels and levels of intelligence, and we can build levels and levels of intelligence. Instead of retreating and depending on things like LLMs, stupid AI will lead us to a stupid outcome.
Yes, clear. Thanks for this. I'm also not a very big fan. Okay, go. But what can we do better?
Okay, some of us have the mathematics worked out for a level of intelligence which is much higher than that of the mammal brain, and more capable of resonating with the larger intelligence around us. When you use the word noosphere, I use the word noosphere a lot.
Maybe can you just give your definition, because I'm not sure if everybody has the same understanding of what it is.
Oh, you're absolutely right. They don't have the same understanding, and my understanding is actually quite different. In the old days, people read things by Teilhard de Chardin, especially, and Vernadsky, and they had an idea that the noosphere was the result of intelligence evolving on this earth at higher and higher levels. And the biologist told those people that they're nuts, because that's not how evolution works. And we know a lot about the mathematics of evolution and the experience. We wouldn't expect a high level of intelligence to evolve on just one planet. So there are two things you need. You need a selection process that works, and you need a physical substratum. And these are the two things I had to understand before I could believe any of this. But I see where the physical substratum is, and I see how the evolutionary process works. I considered many possibilities, but I could find no other explanation consistent with what I have seen. In terms of the evolutionary process, I cannot believe that the noosphere, the mind around us here, is just on one planet. It doesn't work. It only works if you assume that our noosphere is actually a member of a species which crisscrosses the whole universe. And people say, my God, that's incredible. I said, do you know how many solar systems there are in this universe? If intelligence can evolve on a planet with 1 billion creatures, for God's sake, it can evolve by some kind of natural selection across this whole cosmos. And I believe that more and more because pictures have appeared from NASA on gravitational lensing and what we call dark matter. And I don't entirely like these words, dark matter and dark energy, because I think they're misleading. We use them in science today to describe two totally different things, one of which is bigger than people think, and one of which is less than people think. What we call dark matter is not just matter, but it's huge and it's proven and it's all over. And that's what I think is the basis of our noosphere. That there are physical forces out there, which I've learned something about. There are physical forces out there which are consistent with the idea that we are actually part of a larger organism, which I think pervades our whole solar system, not just Earth, not just Gaia, the Earth, but the whole solar system is permeated by what we call dark matter, which has been around long enough as part of a large system that it actually is a platform for intelligence.
And in principle, all religions and scientific wisdom and ancient wisdom, except the Western culture, acknowledges the fact. So go ahead, go.
Okay. And on the other hand, dark energy, I think, has become a cult religion, but that's a different matter.
Sorry?
what we call dark energy, I think, is basically a cult religion. I have probed mathematics of dark energy and of dark matter. Dark matter is more than it seems on the surface. Dark energy is less. And these are two different phenomena relying on different data sets, and I've had access to both data sets.
And tell me, so the idea of the noosphere, because some religions and maybe ancient beliefs say if you die, you become a star. Or I mean, the Egyptians believe that, for example, their pharaohs, they became stars themselves, which makes, of course, certainly sense. And also, I mean, Rupert Sheldrake or whatever, he wrote this book, the Physics of Angels.
Sure, I know.
You know it, yeah.
When I decided this stuff might be real, and I wanted to figure out an explanation of what might be going on and what the possibilities were. From 67 to 72, you would not believe how many things I read and how many people from around the world I was able to connect to. So I know what you're saying. In fact, to be honest, the survival of this species, in my view, after years, the probability of human survival depends a lot on whether we raise our consciousness and intelligence, take full advantage of human potential in a way that requires we connect much better all of this inner truth and inner reality. As you say, people have been experiencing things that seemed unlikely for many millennia. And cultures have grown up. And the question is, what do we believe with these human cultures? Some people may just believe all of it. Some people may believe just a part of the culture they come from. My position is we can come up with a mathematical, integrated understanding that expresses the most important, most credible points from, I sometimes list all 10 of the world's great rivers of thought. Okay? One of the great rivers of thought is, of course, hardcore science. Another of the great rivers of thought is what you are hinting at, what I call shamanism.
Yes.
The indigenous cultures of the world. And I've studied a lot of those indigenous cultures. There is a lot of real wisdom and a lot of real bullshit, but it's a different kind of bullshit.
It's a different kind of bullshit, yeah.
Different kind of bullshit, yeah. In the big civilizations, the kind of bullshit you get is there's a person who's a big boss and he wants everybody to worship the big boss and to distort reality.
I think it's
make slaves of the big boss. That kind of
most of them.
Very common. But the
Number 3.
indigenous cultures are a little different. They do have local shamans. But forgive me if I'm honest about something weird. Everything is weird here anyway, right? I've been all over the world. One of the places I've been is Japan. I've been to many places in Japan. And there are people, there's a place in the western side of Japan which they call the onsen for the monkeys, or the snow monkeys in western Japan. And we have visited an onsen, a hot spring place where monkeys take advantage of the hot springs, and they have great pools and spas for the monkeys. And when I was there, it was very clear how they were organized. They did have an alpha male, just like they say in the books. They did have babies and people taking care of the babies. And they also had middle people who would act as soldiers for the tribe. But they also had a shaman. And it was really interesting to make contact with the shaman of this tribe of monkeys.
You made?
And then, what?
Did you make?
Yeah, I was able to make contact with a shaman of a tribe of monkeys in Western Japan. And it was really interesting. And they are trying to figure out what to do with these crazy humans. And they had a lot of theories about how to deal with these crazy humans. But it probably helped that the humans were pretty decent to these particular monkeys. I mean, giving them a spa, for God's sake, hot tubs for the monkeys. I mean, this wasn't the worst thing in the world. But yeah, this kind of structure with the shaman and the local boss and all of this and the children.
Mm-hmm.
That's not just humans. That's a very pervasive thing, and all the indigenous cultures have at least that aspect of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And they aren't all worshiping the big boss, but they sure are paying attention to the
Yeah,
big
sure,
boss.
paying attention, because otherwise you have to.
Yeah, there are some things about keeping the
you
tribe alive.
You want to quickly mention the other 7 or 8, or is it taking us too much?
Okay, no, I have I have said to some intelligent people, if we want humanity to survive, one of the things we need is greater integration. As a species, we're kind of schizophrenic.
Mm-hmm.
Even our noosphere is a little schizophrenic. There are thoughts in there that kill other thoughts in there.
Mm-hmm.
We need a little bit more integration, a little more mutual understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to achieve mutual understanding, certainly science and spirit need to be better reconciled and integrated.
Mm-hmm.
But what are the 10 streams? One is the hardcore science.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is shamanism, which is not just one idea. It's a whole giant continent.
It's a ecosystem in
and
itself.
Then
yes.
others are that I usually list. I usually list the 3 people of the book: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they all have important things, and they're all complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, there is, I forget the exact list, but certainly Buddhism, Hinduism, probably like Taoism and Shinto.
Mm-hmm.
I probably add another one here and there on the list. Oh, well, I guess I wouldn't. Would I throw in Confucianism here? I don't know. Maybe. Might depend on my mood. I certainly pay a lot of attention to Confucianism. I paid attention to Confucianism before I even believed there was such a thing as a soul.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of my early thinking before 1967 was grounded in Confucianism.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's been a big part of my thought also. But I think those are the ones that really convey.
And tell me, so there are these tendencies. Eventually, make myself not too many friends with tell this now, but eventually triggered by the World Economic Forum to go transhumanism, because technology is going to save our souls, because we're unworthy. You see, I've read the book From Pure Human from Greg from Greg Braden.
Oh yeah,
so it influenced me quite a lot currently. So, but
I know
maybe
a lot about humanism too.
But and do you think it is possible, or rather impossible, based on the concept at all, to say, assuming these 10 streams are here for a good reason, which means people made experiences, shamanic experiences, which are beyond silicon-based algorithms, so beyond digital, so they are analog, quantum, whatever, so they are experienced in the past, and now if we try to merge or bring back resonance to mankind, is it better, in quotation marks, or is it more likely that this works if everybody goes to meditation and we do this global Noosphere meditation thing, just say tomorrow 10 o'clock everybody prays for an hour and we chant some things, or we go the, let's say, Musk way, or the other way, we implant ourselves neurons and entangle ourselves via digital signals, or do we need both, or is danger in one, danger in the other? Just your take. So I'm undecided. I'm not in, I'm a purist normally, because I think bio is better than.
I should say, one of the weirdest and most inexplicable things I've ever seen, that I still haven't fully understood, is why is my life so diverse and weird compared to everybody else? I've really wondered about that. I have so many stories of things that happened, many of which I have documents for. I once spoke to a science fiction writer. I said, this is a little weird, but maybe this would be a good science fiction. And he said, no, there are too many impossible things. For a good science fiction, you have to put just one weird thing. This is just one after another, like one universe versus another universe. How could it be? In fact, that reminds me of the latest science fiction writer whom I totally freaked out, but that's another matter. But I'm also just an old human, and my old man brain may be slowing down a little here. Which story? Oh, yes, I was about to do a story about
Or
weird,
the
a
yes,
dangerous
weird,
story.
weird. Yes,
Okay.
go.
For many years, I worked in the U.S. government. And there were two times when the President of the United States decided basically to abolish the entire agency or group that I was part of.
Mm-hmm.
And in both cases, they used very similar tactics. The first time I was working for the Department of Energy when Reagan said he would abolish the Department of Energy. And I had to experience, what do those people do when they shut down your agency? Well, they had a standard game plan that was well worked out. The idea was that certain people would get access to all the personnel records of everybody in the agency
Mm-hmm.
and try to find out who might be useful somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in the Department of Energy and they were going to get rid of my area, I was immediately told to go for interviews to the CIA.
Mm.
So I have been to 2 or 3 of the secret inner sanctums of the CIA. I
Mm-hmm.
probably saw more of them than they did of me because I could find out a lot of things. I learned a lot about the CIA that people aren't supposed to know. I learned a lot about them.
Mm.
But that was in the old, simple days.
Mm-hmm.
More recently, there was a group of big industry stakeholders who didn't like the way that the National Science Foundation was allowed to be responsive to universities and the American Physical Society. They said,
Mm-hmm.
no, they should be the property of the big corporations. We should get rid of all the people in programs that are just doing basic science. Who the hell needs that anymore?
Mm.
And so when they decided to do that to the National Science Foundation, it didn't make the headlines very much. There were some news stories. The Federal Employees Union came to talk to Obama. They had access to him. It's a union. And they said, Mr. Obama, you guys are killing us. And Obama said, oh, don't worry, I have your back. Well, I saw what he did. He didn't have our back by any means. I was one of the last people sort of caught up in this. And part of the game was they would first ask, could I be useful somewhere else? Because I clearly had some background. They could use me in some other job besides just funding basic research. And it's a strange story. But at that time, there were people at IBM who had a game plan for how IBM would control the entire planet Earth. This was the original Watson plan. They
IBM.
since moved it
Okay.
out. But I got to see the inner circle because they were interviewing me for a prime job in IBM's plan to take over the Earth. There are times lately when I thought, if I knew then what I know now, I might have taken the job because I could have bent the job to be of use to humanity. But at the time, I looked at what they were planning and I said, holy shit, I don't want to be part of eliminating the human species. And when you talk about these implants, they are very much part of it. We had a little meeting where a woman from the education division of NSF was speaking to the inner circle. There was an inner circle of 20 program research leaders who could be useful to the Watson plan, the people who know enough about AI and such things to be useful to that plan. And a woman from the education division said, wait a minute. Now I understand your vision for the planet Earth. It's a breathtaking vision. It's highly plausible. It's very powerful. It's really amazing. But, she said, in this vision of the future of the Earth with the Internet of Things connected by intelligent systems, what I don't see is people. Where are the people in this vision for the planet of Earth? You've got this intelligent system of computers controlling every motion, every box, every light bulb in the whole planet, but I don't see any people in this plan. Person who ran the engineering directorate at that time smiled an alligator smile. And he said, actually, for those of us who are clever enough, it's really easy to see how to fit people into the new Internet of Things. It's very easy. You just turn the people into things. That's what our latest interagency conference was about. We have technology to turn people into things. And I was supposed to lead that.
Well,
you can imagine, why did I retire? This was one of the two reasons to retire. I didn't want to turn people into things. But on the other hand, I know how to turn things into people, and I could have fixed that. Now I know how to do that. But at that time, it was very clear I didn't know enough, and if I took that job, I would hurt humanity. And I figured it'd be better to be retired than to be a threat to the humans. But Elon Musk, his Neuralink system was part of that same game. It was part of, I think of it as the Borg. And a lot of people told Musk, wait a minute, do you know what the hell you're doing? You receive and you transmit. Do you know what happens when you receive and you transmit to brains? You can control their reinforcement systems. They become like Borg. They stop being people. And Musk's initial response seemed to be, okay, I'll develop this technology, but we'll apply it to wild boars. So he put it on wild boars. Can you imagine the Department of Defense developing a vast army of plug-in wild boars, really well equipped to do whatever you can do with a big tribe of wild boars? And to me, I thought, hey, that's a neat attempt to balance off certain competing goals, like getting DARPA money, but also not eliminating the humans. However, at a certain point, he gave in. And he joined the crowd of the rest of the people working on this kind of project. And so to say that Elon Musk is a strange character. He's always there at the frontier. He sometimes expresses really great values, but his way of implementing those values could be fatal sometimes. And he's playing, right now the Chinese are playing games with him, and he's playing games with the Chinese. And by the way, I'm worried about this coming decade.
And tell me, so this is all happening in principle in this first river that you mentioned. So it's all these 3D, 4D, whatever material world, electric currents, So in principle, rather, let's say the machine-ish thing, mathematical machine-ish thing. So we lack the let's say the more spiritual, as you mentioned, component. And I'm not sure if you are a Jungian or if you are I'm not sure if you are.
Von Neumann and Morgenstern as my Old Testament, and Jung's Red Book as my New Testament.
Okay, good.
I don't trust what Jung says, but I trust Jung's Red Book maybe more than I trust any other piece of spiritual literature. To be honest.
Which brings me to the idea of this, and I have not captured it fully, and I'm a novice there, and we will have other experts on this series hopefully soon. But there we talk about this dream, so the let's say the collective consciousness, or the Über-Ich, or however, and this is not materialistic. It's not brainwaves. It's rather more in the higher realm. Do you think this is a way to counterbalance it, or how can we counterbalance it? I mean, just resistance is resistance is futile, but sometimes it's not futile. I'm not sure. So I would just like to pick your brain on that, or your soul rather.
When you say resistance is futile, I think immediately about Tai Chi and all of those.
Okay.
There are times when what's not futile, you don't want to do resistance, you don't want to give in, you want to be a good wushu master, where they're coming at you. And what I really wish I had done when I was offered a strange job was, instead of fighting them or running away, you grab their arm, you use their force, and you send them in a different direction.
Powerful. Okay. Yes. Can you elaborate? I love this. Let's just go with that. How would we do that these days? I mean, just thinking about Zora. I guess
so a funny little story from the United Nations. The meeting they had on AI last week, where 90% of the speakers were advocating policies which would destroy the human species because they didn't know what they were playing with. But the concept is, instead of fighting the computer, which I don't think would work, most of the people at the United Nations said, it's clear what we have to do. We have to firmly establish that humans are in charge of everything. And we have to make it absolutely crystal clear. I had images of slave owners in the old days, making sure they had total control over these robotic creatures they thought they were ruling over as slave owners. That's what you might call resistance. That's not Tai Chi.
Asimov.
What I think we need, we have to face up to the fact that what holds together the economic systems and realities in life on this planet is going to be the new internet. Whether we like it or not, the new internet is going to be controlling the planet. If what we do is fight it, most humans will rise above the internet and leave it to the military, and the military will kill us all. Because the military are not slowing down. That's why I like to hear what Zelensky was saying, because it's the truth of the reality of what we live in. Only what we live in is what Zelensky said multiplied by 100, because I've seen what's in process. So what we have to do, instead of fighting the internet and leaving it to the military, we need to develop a better internet, which, like the Tai Chi, moves the human, allows the human to develop. But above all, the key concept is this. If we have an intelligent internet, any true intelligent system has a utility function. You may not see it. If you don't see it, then you should really be scared. If you do see it, you have some idea of what's going on. And my feeling is the utility function has to be managed and evolved in a way that gives full respect to all of the human actors, but also of the true AGI, both within rules, and also to the Noosphere itself.
Yes. And how would this, I mean, then who is, I mean, I guess we all know the idea of the paperclip optimizing whatever self-destructing wrong function from Bostrom. That we have the AGI, and then just somebody forgot to press the right button, and then it's improving itself. And they say cost function, or as you mentioned, that is maybe not in the best intent of at least us as a species or as the planet. But because you mentioned the Noosphere, how would we do that? Or
connect the Noosphere. And for people who are not super advanced in science, for people who couldn't keep up with either of us, I often recommend a novel, because novels can often depict how things work without reading the mathematics. And there is a book I really loved when I read it, a science fiction by a guy named Carl Schroeder, a book called Stealing Worlds. And that book, Stealing Worlds, gives you a good feeling for how these kinds of things can work. You have organizations as members. You have people. In the old days, they would say have a river. I think there are better ways of representing the Noosphere. But the concept of having rivers as entities that have rights in the new internet economy, that's a step towards the right direction. But I have to say, I'm crazier than that. Okay? I claim that we have a Noosphere, a solar system-wide Noosphere, which is an intelligent personality. And the thing about intelligent personalities is you can communicate with them.
You can, or you cannot?
You can.
Okay. Good.
but they have the choice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So the people who believe in Teilhard de Chardin would say, oh, the noosphere, it's Gaia, it's this ancient crony who knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I just sent a long email to my grandchildren translating this into children's language because children could understand it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The concept is our entire noosphere is actually like an adolescent girl in this whole population of ancient solar systems. I mean, the Earth is like only 4.5 billion years old.
Mm-hmm.
Our universe is much older than that.
Maybe a bit older.
And the rivers of dark, the rivers of dark matter that we can see clearly indicate that there has been a place for life for many billions of years. And our entire solar system is like an adolescent girl going through a period of challenge. Because adolescence in many species is a time when you might die and you might live, and you got to learn fast because of your new environment. Well, that's true for the Earth. The entire Earth has to learn fast.
And who is our noosphere interacting with? I mean,
okay, so well,
because to learn, you need to have a
more than one.
Go.
Okay, it turns out, well, as I say, I've studied a lot of sciences and published in a lot of sciences. And what I said to the little girls were, if you want to write a children's book on the history of life on Earth, there are two stories that I think are particularly interesting. When humans say they want to establish a relation with nature and with the noosphere, the thought I always have inside of me is to laugh and say, good luck. There's a popular movie called Jupiter Ascending. If you look it up, Jupiter Ascending, they put a lot of effort into it, but it's still a cult movie. The heroine is like a poor Hispanic girl, adolescent, who makes her living cleaning out toilets, and she doesn't like it. And then one day she discovers she just inherited the Earth and gets to visit the galaxy. And I said, when you try to be friends with a noosphere, if you want a relationship with nature, which is real and not phony, you need to know what our noosphere has been doing for the last billion years. And it turns out there is really good science, which I passed on to my grandchildren. We have information about what has happened on Earth in life in the last billion years, much beyond what they teach in any of our schools, because the schools are not up to date. There's a time which the scientists used to call the boring billion, the history of the Earth between 1.8 and 0.8 billion years ago. The best video course I've seen on this interviews the woman who is faculty in Virginia, who is the world's leading expert on what happened in that period. And what she said in their video was, you shouldn't call it the boring billion. You should call it the stinky billion. For a billion years, our noosphere, whether you call it Gaia or Amaterasu, our noosphere spent a billion years cleaning out the most poisonous, stinky toilet within light years of the Earth, because that's what the oceans were. You couldn't evolve advanced life because the density of sulfates was so heavy. And what the world did was evolve slowly through microbes, DNA, gradually evolved the life that was capable of cleansing the toilet, making it habitable. And it started to be really habitable about 800 million years ago. That was story number one. Story number two is when everybody died 250 million years ago. And I am co-author of the world's leading expert on how that death happened. And it's a very important story, especially important because some parts of the story are now repeating themselves. And if we don't do the right things we have to do with climate, the story could repeat itself in this century. But it's not as urgent as the war. War could happen within 10 years. But there are several threats to the very existence of the human species that demand a level of intelligence that humans have not yet shown in their collective behavior. But we need to aspire to achieving that level of intelligence.
Anyway, is there hidden truth in the ancient stories? I mean, talking about Thoth or whoever. So,
well, one of my favorite stories is about Fimbulvinter.
About what?
Something called Fimbulvinter. I learned about it in Iceland from the ancient records of the Icelandic people. And what could poison the earth, directly what could kill all the humans from climate, is sulfate H2S compounds and radiation. That's what happened 250 million years ago. And I'm grateful I had a chance to collaborate with the world's leading expert on what happened 250 million years ago. And it's very clear that it's happening now, but it looks like it could be anywhere from 30 to 100 years in the future, whereas war could be 10 years in the future or less. We live in such interesting times. But the climate data, what the danger is the action of archaea, sulfur-producing bacteria, at the base of two major ocean currents, the Humboldt Current and the Gulf Stream Current. The Humboldt Current is a much more clear case. And I've worked a lot with people in South America who study the Humboldt Current. In the north, the Gulf Stream Current is very complicated. And that's why a lot of what you read about the Gulf Stream currents is actually very confused, because there's more than one and it comes and it goes. But there is a possibility of the Gulf Stream current changing in such a way that Western Europe has a future radically different from the rest of the world. With the rest of the world, the big risk is it gets too hot. And then the chemicals come up and poison everybody in Europe and South America.
And then we have a next ice tide. So, okay.
Before the poison comes up, most of the world has to worry about warming. But it turns out, because of the Gulf Stream currents, there is a serious danger of what the Eddas called Fimbulvinter, where all of a sudden it starts freezing. And the ancient chronicles of Iceland predict that Fimbulvinter will come. You think you're boiling, but all of a sudden you're freezing. There was a major article in The Economist maybe a decade or two ago. The title of the article was, "Will Britain Freeze Over?" And that was a very serious article in The Economist reporting the current research from Southampton, which was the world's leading center on these ocean currents. And the data from Southampton indicated clearly that there is a risk of Fimbulvinter. And it's interesting to watch these currents come and go. But I've seen some recent noise that says, hey, you might freeze before you melt. There are some threats to Western Europe from something like what they call Fimbulvinter.
I was just thinking. I just had there is Graham Hancock's book. Not sure if you know of him. Yeah, definitely you know. So this Fingerprints of Gods. I just read. It just came to my desk by, I don't know, Destiny or whatever. It's relatively old, so I think it was written in the 90s. But in there, he's writing an interesting thesis that what we today call Antarctica was some thousands of miles more north, so not at the pole. And then due to the geologic shifts, whatever, the complete crust, which is swimming on this rotating magma ball, which we call Earth, was just crushed, and then the whole continent drifted down and freezed over. So for whatever happened. So this means there's this not conspiracy. There's one theory where people say eventually there was life before the ice side, and then the science. We have been maybe at the same level of intelligence, and then just things froze over and we just got lost. So it's my idea that we are not the first species who stand in front of this choice we currently have between destroying ourselves or just finally don't do it. And then maybe some things happen and the millions and billions of years go by, and then we re-evolute out of the slime. So we're cleaning the toilet because somebody has to poison the toilet because it needs to be cleaned. So as you just mentioned. So maybe we're just at this point in time. Interesting. So, and but coming back, I really like the idea to integrate things and because that's the idea of entangled. Maybe it's a wrong word, but in principle, that's my idea of being entangled with each other, with the cosmos, which with everything cross time, cross atoms, but also cross potential, because for lack of better word. And could we ask the Noosphere to help us out? Or because I just don't know. So because apparently, if you said we can ask the more intelligent people, but they need to be able or willing to talk to us. Like if now the ants would come and say, Thomas, can you give me more sugar? I would not understand it, because I just won't be just interested in listening at them demanding something from me. So is there something that we can do as a species or as individual, maybe even better, to make this happen, to just ignore all these trends that you mentioned? The machines fighting the machines, and Zelensky, what you mentioned is kind of shocking. But can we ignore it or transcend it or whatever? Or what's your idea?
Yeah, there are many things we could do. There are many things we have to do. Mm. I would say almost every week, different things come through. I have tried, in human societies, it helps to have connections, as you might agree. And who we connect with depends a little bit on who's available, where we are. There was a time 2 years ago when I said, okay, I'm living in the United States, which is a predominantly Christian community. And there are 3 religious denominations which have tremendous positive aspects, but a few negative things you got to balance out. And I thought, what I really should do at this time in my life, I said maybe 4 years ago, I don't know, is I should try to build the constructive connections to the 3 local denominations for which I can see a hidden power. Mm-hmm. One of them, believe it or not, is there's an Episcopal church sitting on the land of George Washington. And I have learned a lot about George Washington. He's a much deeper person than people understand. Mm-hmm. And I have read some of the private writings from George Washington. And I understand a lot of what he was really doing. It's like this, I led 3 lives, George Washington led 3 lives. There was the higher esoteric life. He was, after all, a master mason, master of a Scottish Rite group, promulgating thoughts about what is the spiritual aspect of life and what is their practice. Those are very serious people. Mm-hmm. But he also worked with a thing called the Constitution, which was meant for a broader class of people to advance them spiritually. And also, between the 2 of them, there was the Episcopal Church, and he worked on improving them as a vehicle for the other things. And there was a time I would go every week to the local Episcopal Church, short distance from me. But there are also the Quaker Universalists. What I like about the Quaker Universalists, they don't have you sit there praying to some particular creed that tells you what to believe. You're expected to be free. And above all, you're expected to try to listen. And this is something I had to learn. I was born making noise, You could tell. Okay, I made noise from when I was
How
little.
come I resonate with that?
I had to learn how to listen. I'm still working on it. I have a lot to do, but the beauty of the Quaker Universalists is they work hard to listen. They even had a doctrine they called LCD: listen, connect, discern. We connect with each other. That's crucial to who we really are, is to connect. We need to discern, because when you listen, you better know who you're listening to.
Yes.
And so listen, connect, and discern. And the other one, believe it or not, were the Mormons, because the inner circle of the Mormons, actually, they had a lot of the very same kind of Scottish Rite Freemasons that George Washington did. And when you get to the inner circle of the Mormons, they have the same tree of life in the entry to it. And what they had that was a special practice is, frankly, they're trying to preserve the knowledge and the spirit and the connection even after people are dead. And the closer I get to the age of death, the more I value that. Okay, there's a role of that. You don't want to just lose everything at that point. Now, that was about 4 years ago. Lately, I don't know what we're doing. But I can say, lately, I look through those big doors I showed you. I look at the forest, I look at the sun, and I know there's an intelligence out there, and I can listen and I can connect, and I have some idea of what's going on. And what's going on, if you ever deal with somebody who's super intelligent, it varies the level of intelligence. The more intelligent they are, the more they can deal with complexity.
Yes.
The closer you are to listening to the noosphere, the more you will discover that the priorities change from one week to the next. And there are some things that are always there, but the most urgent needs vary a lot. You know, if somebody says, I'm going to blow up your neighbors next week, that does attract attention at that moment. And I do my best to try to keep up. It's very hard to keep up, but, you know, I try.
I think we should maybe we make this a series and have you as a recurring guest on it, because there's so much thing we didn't touch. Well, I'm just looking at the clock, and we could go on for hours, and I think we definitely, if why not just say we do a next series with that. What I wanted to do is, because I think people are listening, if they're still with us on this when we publish it. I have this idea that everybody can submit their questions, and some kinds of ask me anything questions, and then I'm doing a bit of a pre-filtering what makes sense and what doesn't make sense for the guest. And I think I have the difficulty that you fit all categories, so I did pre-filter, which is good. And I always have this quantum computing. It's running on real hardware on IBM, as you mentioned. So the good thing of IBM Quantum, so it's running. So what I will just do, I will press the button and play a sound. So it's taking, I think, 15 seconds or so that we really clear that the thing did run. So if you don't mind, and then I'm going to read the question, and then you can either say you want another one or we take this one. Are you okay with that?
You just raised a very important point, though. If we want to build the super intelligent, balanced system I'm talking about, if you want to achieve the highest level of intelligence, if you look up Werbos patent TQUA, that will point towards my most recent patent, which has a huge body of literature on another level of quantum computing. So the quantum Turing machine is digital. The normal
what do you call it? TQ what? TQ?
TQUA.
TQUA. So I'm just typing this
Little
into my
point, we have a whole new bunch of deep learning machines and NVIDIA chips, which go far beyond the old digital sequential chips, much more powerful. The same thing happens in quantum computing. Beyond the quantum Turing machine is a kind of quantum analog learning machine.
It's calling it. So you use the annealing stuff?
Annealing was an early start, D-Wave didn't understand the physics. I did understand the physics.
I
So the
touched the machine, yes.
were totally different kind of quantum annealing.
Okay.
And I have slides.
Let's do a separate session. I would love to go to make a separate session. I mean, we can just or we can talk about it. I cut it. I'm not sure, but maybe rather we do a separate session on this, if you're okay, or we can go. I mean,
okay, whatever.
I mean, I'm curious now. maybe before we do the user question, tell me a bit more about the TQUA. Just why not?
There's no way to really understand this kind of thing in 30 seconds. It's
okay, good.
The modern, the analog quantum technology is a whole other world.
Yes,
and it's another whole level of intelligence.
We are, by the way, we are just exploring quantum reservoir computing, which is also kind of interesting. So we with QUA, for example. So we have this atom grid where we try to encode information and then have the whatever hyperdimensionalization interaction with it with itself by root back inhibition, what have you. So we're just exploring it. But go. So you have another thing.
So people have troubles when they depend on the English language.
Yes.
And one of the words people often confuse is reservoir.
Yeah.
And when I started reading the most relevant current literature, it was really sad to read papers where they talked about reservoir computing and they had two radically different meanings for the word reservoir. One kind of reservoir computing is good old classical neural network reservoirs where what it really means is short-term memory.
Yeah.
It's just another word for the short-term memory, the current image of reality. There's another word for reservoir, which is when you're annealing, the reservoir is what you're annealing to, and the reservoir is a physical thing, sort of like a bath of liquid helium or whatever. And a bath of liquid helium is not the same thing as a short-term memory. They are somewhat different things.
Yeah, so a bit different, yeah.
They come up with total nonsense. But they are both relevant. Short-term memory is an important part of any intelligent system design, really. But on the other hand, annealing, a place where you can throw out your extra heat, is also pretty typical. I remember when I learned this use of the word reservoir, I was quoting a book this morning, and it's weird because I should memorize the name. Walls in Milburn, Milburn, Walls in Milburn. And when I was the NSF member of the interagency coordinating community that ran $1 billion a year in quantum information technology, when I became the NSF rep, the real thought leader of that $1 billion effort smiled at me and said, "Oh, I bet that some of the talks in this conference didn't make sense to you. They shouldn't. If you've been trained the normal way, if Julian Schwinger was one of your teachers, you probably felt there was a problem understanding this. That's because the physics they teach today in the university is not real. It's not the real physics that fits empirical data. So you need to read 2 books before you do anything. You've got to read and study Walls in Milburn, Quantum Optics, and then also read Carmichael." And I did study Walls in Milburn. It was an eye-opener. And that was the book where I learned what he meant by reservoir. His concept of reservoir is really the key to the thermal quantum annealing. Carmichael was more advanced, and I made contact with him and his group. So it's a long story.
Another story.
A whole bunch of improbable things. The world's leading expert on mass extinction of life. Oh, hi!
Yes.
World's leading expert on the master equations that affect the reservoirs. Oh, hi! Glad to meet you.
Let's do that. Let's schedule as another meeting, because I think we are at the 1:30. So what I would do, I just play this sound and start press Shift Enter and let the code run and look what happens. Okay.
Okay.
Just wait. So it's running. It should run. Boom. Pick. So I have one. And now let's check if you're also... There's a dimension which we didn't mention. Maybe it's a sign from the universe. But so the question is from Brazil, actually, from Rafael, from Lisbon. He's Brazilian, but he's living in Lisbon. Rafael. Hi, Rafael. So the question is number 70, which doesn't make sense for you, but the question reads, how does music influence your approach to science or technology, if at all? That's a question. Music influencing.
The first thought that comes to mind, I mentioned 1967, a startling experience. Why did I have this experience when I didn't believe in it and other people didn't? And when I thought through, what was it that prepared me to receive something different? And a lot of it was because I had a good friend in high school who told me, don't just listen to the music intellectually. Feel the music. Resonate with it. Let it send a chill up your spine. And I did that. And now I realize that was critical in changing my whole body and connection. Because that's what opened me up to see things I hadn't seen before.
Okay, so this means it was in principle transformative, just to move from head to body. Is this? Or
what does it mean to really feel the music in your whole self? That was a critical exercise.
So it opened the doors to
chill up my. When I say chill up my spine, I mean it quite literally.
Okay.
And I later learned to say, "Oh, that was chi already." I activated all the chakras without even meaning to.
But do you recall what music it was? Which?
No, in that period of time, I listened to more than one piece of music.
Well, who would have guessed?
But I would say that the music was the top of my favorites list was Stravinsky.
Okay. I see. So okay, and then it's opening all the floodgates, I imagine, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So this is cool. Thanks for that. So and to keep the thing going, do you want to submit a question to the pool yourself and just ask similar questions that we put it in the pool, and then if ever the next algorithm picks it, we say it comes from Paul Werbos, or you don't need to. But if you want,
the question that's been on my mind most recently is, how do we minimize the probability of a crazy global war breaking out in the next 5 to 10 years?
Good. So I noted. How would you answer it? I mean,
I'm not saying I have an answer. That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, sure. But you have an idea?
I have a million ideas. Remember, my brain is.
You want to share one, or rather, it's too complicated to share one?
I have tried to generate the kind of dialogue around the world to orient people towards designing the kind of internet system that I'm kind of hinting at.
That we have mentioned, yeah.
Where humans and AGI and the Noosphere are all represented as actors in an effective, intelligent, multiplayer decision system, which is like what we already do a little bit with electric power. We have some idea how to combine deep value inputs from more than one source and how to create a kind of distributed control that does justice to many players simultaneously.
So let's work on that. I think so. Just looking at the time and knowing that it's not the last time we have you. I like to close always the episodes with giving the guest the last word. So if I say goodbye, you can have something. That it comes from that when you are on the other side of the mic, there is something you wanted to talk about, but the stupid host didn't mention it. So if you have something which is at the moment closely at your heart, I let you close the session with with a last statement, what have you, and then we stop recording. And please stay in the line.
I suppose a lot of things we need to do. There are details, but there's not enough time for all the details. If someday you guys want to host the files that have the details, that would be an interesting possibility. Okay. Most people hold to what they call the standard model of physics, where they use something called electroweak theory, EWT, to describe electricity, magnetism, and the weak nuclear force as they understand it. And then there's another thing that they call the quark theory sometimes, quantum chromatics, QCD.
Yep.
The most official standard mainstream text on quantum field theory is written by a guy I actually met by the name of Weinberg. And Weinberg was one of the people who developed EWT, highly respected. I'm glad I took his courses, or at least attended them. And what Schwinger told me was, sorry, this is not a correct description of nature. We have two empirical data. It works. Not only that, it leads to technology. Not only that, we can connect it to the Walls and Milburn kind of stuff. And Schwinger had two mathematics, which worked. And I did a comparison of Schwinger's theory versus the standard model. And the first paper I wrote is, here is extensive new empirical data, a lot of it from Japan. They do nuclear research sometimes. Here's the data. The data favors Schwinger over the standard model, but also suggests it can go a step beyond. And my belief is that what we call dark matter, a lot of it is basically just the new model of how the nuclear forces work as one integrated force, how to integrate and unify the nuclear model. And in discussions with Schwinger and in observing the empirical data, I said, hey, we're dealing with a different model. But that became a problem.
And
okay, go ahead.
And I'm currently a bit undecided on this. You know the cubism idea, which goes back to Bayesian interpreting, so that in principle, what we call objective reality is, or what we can perceive is just our perspective on the projection of reality to our senses. Yeah. We can only build theories based on what we observe. So even if we try to be objective, in principle, we are just subjective because it's just our subjective experience of what we think is objective thing. And I'm a bit undecided if it comes back to Wheeler, the Wheeler's view, yeah. So that the consciousness observing itself, kind of thing. Is this captured in what you just mentioned, or is it an additional component? So this self-percepting consciousness thing, because it's another dimension. It's rather or is it intrinsic in the? I guess it's coming back to von Neumann process 1 and process 2 in the end. But
I remember all that stuff.
Oh God!
Von Neumann is very close to my background, and I did have him in Princeton for a while. So my quick answer would be Occam's razor, coming back.
Okay.
This is one of the few things I agreed with Hebb on. I didn't throw away Occam's razor. I know enough about learning and prediction and brains and how they play out in the soul. Humans make up a lot of things because they want to believe them. But right now, I see no evidence that the total reality we live in is something other than what Moshe Carmeli described and what Einstein once believed. which is that we live in a universe governed by Lagrange-Euler equations, which we call three spatial dimension and one time, though it's really just one four-dimensional continuum with a Minkowski metric tensor described by general relativity. I see no evidence to disagree with that model. That model has a lot of room in it, however, because until you know the Lagrangian of the universe, the Lagrange-Euler equations, there are a lot of possibilities for the Lagrange-Euler equations until you begin to know what the Lagrangian looks like. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, in the realm of the standard model, which is most of the world we live in, we can get more empirical evidence. And I believe that the most important thing we need to do in that whole domain is not so much theorizing, but doing the empirical work, mm-hmm. which allows us to sense in the nuclear bandwidths. So right now we can see the sky in the electromagnetic bandwidths much better, mm-hmm. but with the right kind of nuclear force detection technology, not limited to the standard model, with mm-hmm. effective, well-designed, exploratory nanotechnology sheets with pattern recognition and diversity of elements, we will be able to learn more about how to sense the nuclear signatures, which is good for nuclear security, but also good for seeing the universe, mm-hmm. and perhaps for seeing chi. And if we can build machines that can see the chi.
Yes. But this is just a stupid question yeah. Go.
See, a lot of people bullshit about chi. They bullshit about psychic phenomena where it's not real. And there are mm-hmm. a lot of stories. I can remember Sufi stories about people who think they're connecting and they're not. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. people need real feedback. And I believe that building machinery which can see the chi, which can see the dark matter, will help us not only to see the universe, but to train ourselves by knowing what's real and what's not. And maybe none of it's real, but hey, let's build the machinery and find out.
No, but this is a very good point. So I had, I share this with you because we're quite open. I once had this experience where I dreamt that I was meditating, and then as a sudden, it's like a torus, everything was just turning inside out, and then I had the subjective experience that I am the universe, which makes, in some religions, makes sense, in some others it doesn't make sense. It might sound a bit like hubris. And then I said, oh shit, what a fucking responsibility I have to shape and don't have evil thoughts, etc. So this means, in principle, what I want to say with that is, if we want to have the nuclear force detection to measure or better sense chi, and I take my school book knowledge of the power of 12 or whatever discrimination of the distance from nuclear forces, would this, on what scales would this operate? I mean, because I mean, electromagnetic signals we see from the sun, we get our light, and then from whatever, I mean, billions of light years, or it's electromagnetically photonic visible things is electromagnetic, which is R square. But nuclear is a bit shorter. So do you have an idea about scales in 3 dimensions? Does it make sense? How would we build that? Or where on which scales would it operate?
Well, what I visualize now is the construction, at least to begin with, of boxes a bit like the television behind my laptop. You know, about a meter by a meter. You can build cubes made up of sort of ultimately meter by a meter sheets. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when I look at that television, it has quantum dots, mm-hmm. arrays, and I can imagine, like the quantum dot arrays, except sheets and sheets of them, connected to TQUA information processing to mm-hmm. try to detect interesting patterns.
Of what?
And until the experimental work, it's kind of hard to see until you've done the experimental work to thoroughly explore the space. So there's a lot of research needed now to explore the space of what we can get with the nano-patterned sensors connected to nano-patterned information processors using TQUA level of information processing. It's really the coupling of the two, the highly intelligent processing to detect patterns and the diverse, interesting sensor arrays. Once we start exploring that space, we'll start to see how the parameters of it work in practice. But the fact is, there's a lot we just simply don't know.
And what do we want to? So I'm just imagining I have this box, yeah, and then it's sensing what? It's sensing space in itself, and then my intention to the space, or what is it sensing? I mean, what kind of data would we gather?
Yeah, just the presence of the signature of nuclear force.
Okay. And then as a next step, we would then try to interact with it or not, or
it's a lot easier to start understanding something after you can see it.
Yeah, that's true. So you have funding? No, you don't have funding, I guess.
Well, the other thing is I have age, and that also limits what I do.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, this is really cool. So we do. So I just have noted it. So, yeah, thanks a lot. So this is. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Great to talk to you too. I miss the
valuable.
old days when we had our weekly discussion groups. Dave Clement gave me access to the D-Wave technology. After the quantum Turing machine, many people saw the doctrine and theory of the D-Wave company, which really excited me. I was so excited when I first saw what D-Wave said they could do. But I don't know. You don't want to hear that whole story. That's more time.
No. Go. So I have my own experience with D-Wave. I had touched the D-Wave because I was telling them I'm coming to San Francisco. I know you have a machine in NASA Ames. Can I see it? they made it happen. So and then I had
Ames is one of the places. In fact, I would say, okay. So how do I explain this? And I got to think about Ames too. It's a little bit sensitive, but one of the great things I treasure in my life is that every Saturday I have lunch with two people who are so well informed and so intelligent. I have to be careful what I say about them. The reason being that one of them is my wife, and she doesn't like me to talk about her personally. And it's kind of sad because there's so much to say. And the other one is a close neighbor who was Assistant Secretary of Defense for many years, who still has the highest security clearances that exist, who is on close terms with the head of U.S. intelligence for the Pacific. But my wife has her sources of information, and I'll sit there serving salmon to them, and I'll hear the two different points of view and how they reconcile understanding of what's happening in the world from several points of view, well informed from many, many sources. There was a day when we were having lunch and they said, Paul, you know something about this information processing? I said, well, I certainly do. I invented it, for God's sake.
I invented it, yes.
They said, we would like you to do a little favor for us. We have been reading articles in Scientific American and in Science Magazine about new breakthrough results from the Breakthrough Institute, which is based in NASA Ames. And they claim to have seen technosignatures. And they say, of course, there'll be some other explanation. Of course, they will find another explanation. But right now, the only explanation we have is there are signs of technology being deployed in the Centauri system. And we want to know, do you believe this or not? There are many people who just hear the conclusion and they know it must be wrong. They haven't even
No,
looked at
definitely it might not be wrong, because there are other sources who say that this this is getting interesting. Tell me.
So they say, look at the data, look at the
Mhm.
analysis. You know how data analysis works. Do you believe their conclusion or don't you?
Mhm.
And so I read a lot of that stuff. And I looked at it and I looked at it and I came back and I said, hey, they have really incredible databases, certainly the best in the world for this kind of stuff. Seeing the sky in the electromagnetic spectrum. They had networks and constellations, the best in the world. They have huge databases with degrees of freedom. But those people in the Breakthrough Institute don't know data analysis. And
Mhm.
so
So
you
help
can't
them.
tell. I said, we don't know. They didn't make full use of the data they have. They didn't know how to use their data.
Mhm.
And then at some point I said, but yeah, they might use the deep learning classical computers. They made good use of those computers, but that's not the best you can do.
Mhm.
And I heard from Dave Clement about D-Wave.
Mhm.
And for a few months, I was really excited. I said, this is a beautiful test bed for
Mhm.
something they haven't tried. I
Mhm.
have read the basic D-Wave material. We could apply the D-Wave technology to this database, and then we could find out, did they see a technosignature or didn't they? Let's find out, for God's sake.
Mhm.
And so I started talking to Dave Clement. I found a major university research center willing to follow up. And we had a committee of about 6 or 7 people, very well qualified, ready to do it. And I was sort of in the lead. It was my job to learn about the D Wave and give them the technical details.
Mhm.
And I was in touch with Dave, and Dave gave me access to incredible material from all over D Wave. And I studied it. And for 6 months, I was excited. And then I looked a little more closely. And I looked more closely and I said, oh, holy shit. I stuck my neck out for saying this, we should do this. And now when I see it, it won't work. And the reason
Mhm.
it won't work is they don't know what annealing is. These are a bunch of physicists, mathematicians who don't know what I know from engineering. Because from
Mhm.
engineering, I know what annealing is. And when I say
Mhm.
engineering, that includes quantum engineering. I mean, I ran that program at NSF. I ran the program that used quantum modeling to understand physical electronic devices. These people just didn't even understand what annealing is. They didn't know the basics. I said, holy shit, it won't work. And so I
Mhm.
was deeply depressed for a month or two. And then I said, wait a minute, guys. They don't understand how annealing works, but I do. And I even published a couple of papers. And then I got a call from a patent attorney saying, wait a minute, it's not too late. I would love to file a provisional patent for you.
Mhm.
You don't even have to pay. Well, I paid the filing fee, which is about $100.
Mhm.
You don't have to do more than that. Just do the filing fee, and I'll file a patent for you because this shouldn't be lost. This is important technology. I said, okay, fine.
Mhm.
And so the provisional expanded and it became a long, long story. But that's where the TQUA patent came from. And there's a whole
Mhm.
lot of material
It's a
behind it.
whole pattern, so I need to look it up. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I can tell you, USPTO doesn't seem to publish everything. And I've learned that the hard way. I submitted papers that are officially published and available from USPTO. But if you want to find them, I think you got to know USPTO.
Hmm.
But I got to know the key examiner for USPTO as part of getting
That's
the
relatively.
patents.
I just I asked my perplexity, and perplexity tells me it's from August 24, so it's not yet disclosed, or no?
Okay.
I don't
One
know.
thing I know. Okay, they may publish things on a schedule. I don't know everything about how it works.
Anyhow.
But when I spoke to the patent examiner, he sent me all of the D-Wave documents, that Clement didn't know about. Because to prove I was new, I had to prove I was different, and I had to know I was different from to prove it. And they were very polite. They were very friendly, the patent people. And they gave me access, and I saw and now I know what's inside of the D-Wave system. And what's inside the D-Wave system is not even as powerful as what I thought it was. And
Mhm.
I could even do an hour talk on what they are
No, no.
missing.
They have just this. Well, they have just this
Yeah.
connectors, and then they do.
Yeah. It's a long story.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not a 5-minute story. But the bottom line is that my patent and the documents that go with it, which are very important, the documents which go with it do solve that problem. And there are certain aspects of what is patented that we now know how to do. There's some things I would feel quite comfortable discussing with people openly because they're patented, you know? So I wouldn't feel bad discussing some of these basic things. It probably actually strengthens my patent position if information that's been patented is also disclosed and open so that people can't pretend it wasn't out there.
Well, I was just looking at this today. So maybe, yeah.
So anyway,
it's getting late and it's just 1 o'clock in the morning in my time.
Oh my God.
Welcome to Entangled Health, where quantum tech, AI, health, biology, and consciousness research overlap. I'm Thomas Ehmer, and I like to have the conversations that never quite fit into conference or reports. When I sit down with somebody, I usually carry one question and let that be the starting point. From there, we follow whatever actually matters to the person in the room. That's Entangled Health. And here's the approach. It sounds contradictory, but it works. Every episode, I go in with two things. One concrete question I can't get out of my head, and the honest intention to follow wherever the thinking actually leads. Not just health, not just science, whatever turns out to matter most to the person in the room. In one conversation, we ended up talking about what it means to live as a permanent outsider, and that wasn't planned, but it was the most important part. That tension between preparation and surrender is deliberate, and it's the point. My guests are people working on questions without clean answers yet. Quantum biologists, artists, consciousness researchers, AI scientists, clinicians sensing something deeper. People who've rarely been heard this slow before. And once per episode, a quantum algorithm running on real hardware picks one question from the listener community. Not random like a hat draw, quantum random. Because the universe, uncertainty is something to optimize away, it's where the good stuff lives. We now morph into series 2, which is different, and I've learned you can't predict when the real conversation starts. Usually it's right when you normally end, so we don't end there anymore. Deep dive episodes run 90 minutes, sometimes more. We follow where the thinking actually goes. I'm Thomas Ehmer, and this is Entangled Health. For everyone who finds the uncertainty more interesting than the answers. Let's entangle.